Mr.
Lundin.
Lundin.
Yeah, well, it's the Scandinavian.
I see.
Spelling.
Okay, Lundin, yes. That's going to be here presenting his books that he's written and leadership. Anyway, he'll get into all that. I don't need to. And Tony Baker, he's being
Here he is.
Oh, just in time. Who's going to tell you all about the digital way of doing your history for your clubs. So, you're on.
Good, I'm going to go first.
Good.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all coming. I'm going to be showing slides. I don't know how visible they are from this part of the room. You'd have a better view of them if you want to move over here, but that's your call. You can probably see it. Well, both Tony and I are going to talk about creating histories of ski clubs. And we're taking a little different tack. Tony is going to be talking about how to actually do it using the files you have within your own ski club and how to actually create the book. And he's done a wonderful one for Rusty Nails and he gave you the link to that. I'm taking a little bigger focus, broader focus. I'm a ski historian. So what I would like you to do if you're going to create this is go beyond your club's records and see the role that your club played in the ski industry in your local area. And believe me, a number of your clubs played a major role. So I'm going to start out, and then Tony will take up the cudgel when I'm done. Now, the question is, why should we create the histories of ski clubs? Well, skiing started in this country through ski clubs. They had a major role starting in the late 1800s to introduce skiing to our country and promote skiing in our local areas. And that, unfortunately, is a history that's almost forgotten now. And it's incumbent on all of us affiliated with clubs to recreate that. And that's the one thing I've been working the last decade or so on, is keeping those memories of the early days of skiing relevant. Now, as you may know, skiing was brought to this country by Norwegian immigrants. And late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a flood of Scandinavian immigration. The Norwegians settled along the northern tier of the United States and formed ski clubs. And as you can see, by 1930, nearly 1 million people living here were either born in Norway or their parents were. And nearly half of them lived in New York, Chicago, Minneapolis, or Seattle. And those were really the centers of early ski jumping and ski competition in this country. And it's important to note that for 40 years, ski jumping was the principal form of skiing in this country. Alpine skiing really didn't start until the late 1930s. And much of it was influenced by the opening of Sun Valley in December 1936 by Union Pacific, where all of a sudden, rather than hiking up hills, you could sit down and go up there. And that was a great transition. And Sun Valley really introduced alpine skiing to this country. So the Norwegians were crazy. They learned that skiing was part of their childhood. They learned it as kids. They loved to ski jump. And when they came here, they introduced the national sport to our country. It was cultural pride and a way to bond with their new area where they lived. And it was said that when 2 or 3 Norwegians get together, they build a ski jump and hold a competition. And that was true, and they also formed ski clubs. And you can see here how early the ski clubs formed in the Midwest. From 1885 to 1889, in all the principal Midwestern states, Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And it spread from there. By 1900, there were over 30 ski clubs in Michigan itself, and comparable numbers in all those other states. And they all Norwegian ski jumping clubs. They all had ski jumps, and they all had competitions with each other. And finally, it was chaotic so much, so they finally imposed order. In 1891, the Central Ski Association formed to basically coordinate the schedules and bring order to the chaos. And in 1905, the National Ski Association formed, and they imposed design standards and coordinated the calendars, and they were the ones who hosted or sanctioned ski competitions from that point on. So, and they held national ski championships every year, but these were ski jumping tournaments. In fact, the first really alpine national ski tournament they had was in 1935 at Mount Rainier, Washington. So the first national downhill and slalom ski championships, and it was also the tryouts for the 1936 Olympic team. So again, you had all of these Norwegian ski clubs all over the country holding competitions with each other. And that was true for certainly all over the West and the areas of the far West ski club. You can see this is a list of ski clubs in the state of Washington, my state, and how early they formed. And again, because they were early on, this was what skiing was in Washington State. The Mountaineers were first in 1906. Leavenworth Ski Club, Eastern Washington. You can look at the dates to see how early they were. These were all very active. They had, and they introduced skiing to the state of Washington. Mount Rainier, we started having ski tournaments from 1917 to 1924, ski jumping tournaments. So the ski clubs there hosted and sanctioned those tournaments. And all over the state of Washington, we had clubs who were hosting not only tournaments between the other clubs, but national and international tournaments. So they played a key role in the state of Washington and elsewhere in introducing skiing. The Holly Ski Club, I was a longtime member, formed in 1930. You may. You want to go back?
No, too complicated, because skiing between Genoa and Glasgow from the sometime in the 1860s to the 1880s.
Yep.
20 years.
He was a Norwegian, even though that was his American name.
But I mean,
And he was a postman, and that's why he delivered mail.
he was a volunteer postman. He
Well,
wasn't official.
That he delivered
He got
mail,
paid,
yeah.
by the way.
Yeah. And we had in Sun Valley, in the early mining days, in the 1880s, there were Norwegians who delivered mail from the Sun Valley up over Galena Pass into Sawtooth. So the Norwegians were doing skiing. Norwegians actually did what we know as alpine skiing back in the day, back in the country. But ski jumping was a national sport, so that was really what they focused on. And again, showing the importance of ski clubs in the state of Washington. And I'll talk a lot about the state of Washington because that's where I've done my research. But the sources of information are really generic, and you can look at you get comparable sources elsewhere. We hosted international ski jumping tournaments until 1978 in the state of Washington. And they started in 1917 on Mount Rainier. And we did over the 4th of July. And it was the second place in the world after Finland, Norway, where you could hold a midsummer tournament. It really started en masse in 1929 when the Seattle Ski Club formed, the Leavenworth Winter Sports Club Ski Club formed, and Cascade Ski Club of Portland. And there was a four-way circuit for a couple of decades where the best ski jumpers in the world came to compete. And you can see on the left the map. And this is a map that was from the Seattle Times. And there, the jumpers would come, and almost every other week there would be another tournament, another forum. And we would have 5,000 to 10,000 people going to all these tournaments, and many the same people. And these were rugged Scandinavians too. You had to hike up the hill and stand outside all days in the snowstorms. But again, it was through the ski clubs, and the ski clubs would play the key role. And this just shows you that the extent of the importance of ski jumping tournaments hosted by ski clubs in Washington. We had 9 national ski jumping championships, 6 Olympic team tryouts, and there were 7 national distance records set in the state of Washington. Again, at tournaments hosted by ski clubs in the state. And that's why they played such a big role in introducing skiing, rather than everyone had a great time like you do in your ski club. But you know, those early ski clubs really had a great role in introducing and publicizing skiing. And of course, our association recognizes that. they have a list of historic ski clubs. And my ski club, Sahali, is number 2 there, formed in 1931. And I helped Sahali get that historic designation. This year I have Sun Valley Ski Club, of which I'm also a member, get its historic designation. And if you notice, there's kind of a dearth of Washington ski clubs. And I've contacted since then at least 3 ski clubs that I'm trying to encourage to get historic status by this organization. So, where do you get information if you want to write about your ski club? Now, as Tony will point out, the principal information is from your own records, photographs, and all ski clubs usually have a plethora of internal information. Again, I want you to go outside that and find out the role your ski club played in promoting skiing. Now, for me, much of the information I get comes from newspapers. And this happened to be my latest book, Ski Jumping in Washington, Nordic Tradition. I'm being honored with the Western Heritage Award this year for my work in promoting ski jumping. And this book exemplifies it. If you go through here, I have a lot of material from newspapers that I've scanned, and a lot of information about the role of ski clubs in promoting skiing. Now, where do you get those? Well, we live in a digital age, and most of the newspapers have been scanned. You can get access to them on your computer, and you can do word searches. And this makes research very easy and something you can do from your own house. Now, for me, if you have a Seattle library card, you have access to the digital archives. And as you can see here, I can get access to all the New York Times, Seattle Times, and the Seattle PI. Just, through my computer, I can pull it up now. And you can do a word search. Now, on the right-hand side, this is just a quick word search I did for Seattle Ski Club in 1934. And this is how it appears. You get a little summary of what the article is and the date, and you can click on it and bring up the whole article. And it's just a treasure trove of information this way. And, as I said, much of the information in my books comes from these sources. Now, where do you get them? Your local libraries. The Library of Congress has nationally, all of these newspapers that have been scanned. There's some private sources as well, so you have to be a little creative, but you can find some source of them in your local area. And this is just an example of how much coverage of skiing there was in the early days. When was the last time your local newspaper had anything about skiing? Right? Well, good for you. Good for them. Send them my compliments. This just happened to be one page from the sports page of the Seattle Times from 1939. It's got 7 articles on skiing. And this was not unusual because skiing was brand new in those days, and most of the local newspapers were promoters of whatever was going on. And certainly in the skiing areas, they gave coverage to skiing. And you can see 7 articles. One about the Seattle Ski Club beat where the famous Norwegian Berger Ruud was competing. Another one with Sigmund Uland was competing. Cross-country victory in Salt Lake. And coverage of Poland, of skiing in Poland. And this is Seattle covering of Poland skiing. But this is not, this is rather typical. And I'm sure you'd find that in your own newspapers. Now, again, here are 2 that I found in my research. Seattle Ski Club was formed by Norwegian in 1929, and they hosted many of the major ski tournaments thereafter for decades. And here's just one article from 1930 that talks about the president who was a King's Cup winner from Norway, gave his background, talked about Seattle Ski Club building the lodge on Snoqualmie Pass and the ski jump they were building to improve it. So this went on maybe 5,000 words, and this is a summary of the Seattle Ski Club's origin, and it's the Seattle Times. The next one is just another random article I found. Seattle Times from 1940 talks about a major ski jumping tournament hosted by the Leavenworth Sports Club. And here, the famous Torger Torkla, who was a sensation from Norway, who moved here in 1939 to compete, was competing against Alf Engen, who was the best-known jumper who lived in the U.S. from 1929 on. And they have extensive coverage of the tournament, the backgrounds of all the competitors, and what the ski club did to host it. So again, a treasure trove of information. And you'd be surprised the little jewels you'll find. This is my old ski club, Sahara. And they had 4 or 5 tournaments a year. And they were all covered by the Seattle Times, the Seattle PI. And this tells you who they competed against, who raced, and who won. And when I joined in the 70s, some of those people in the 30s were still active members. And you get wonderful jewels. You can see the middle one, and the name that's highlighted, Don Fraser. He competed for the Mountaineers against the Holly Ski Club, and he was a member of the 1936 Olympic team. He was one of 5 Washington skiers who went as an Olympic team member, and he competed against the Holly Ski Club. So it's like your ski club says, well, show up next weekend, we'll compete against the guys down the road, and Bodie Miller is going to be competing for them by the way. So bring your big boy skis. Another great resource are the American Ski Annuals. They were produced by the National Ski Association every year from 1934, at least to the 60s. And they have extensive coverage of the whole ski scene in the United States and worldwide. And at the end, they have what's called reports from associations. And they had associations all over the country. And Sun Valley and the others were in the Pacific Northwest Association. And you can see every year there are detailed discussions from each ski club about what they're doing, additions they're making to the lodges, tournaments they hosted. And here you can see Leavenworth Ski Club, Spokane Ski Club, Cascade Ski Club from Portland, Washington Ski Club. So go back and take a look at these, and it will give you terrific information about what your ski club was doing in those days. We'll have to say those are a little hard to find. I had to get mine in the library in Sun Valley. They have all, they're not available online, unfortunately. I wish they were. But you have to search for them. Yes?
When did they discontinue doing that?
I don't know. I've researched them through the 60s. And I think that's probably as far as they went. Because in 1934, skiing was brand new. The National Ski Association didn't recognize alpine skiing until 1934. Up to that point, it was exclusively ski jumping and cross country. As I said, the first national championship involving alpine events was 1935 in Mount Rainier. And when the Olympics started in 1924, the only ski events were Nordic, ski jumping and cross country. And the first Olympics to feature alpine skiing was 1936 in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. So that just shows the evolution of skiing in our country. It was all Nordic until the mid and late 30s. So other sources of information you can look at. Again, these are ones I found that I used. But my word of advice is don't reinvent the wheel, because there's been an awful lot done on the history of skiing and ski clubs. Most of these references I got from our own website. And Arcadia Publishing has published an awful lot about skiing history. In California, our own Ingrid Wicken has done marvelous work, and all of her books talk about not only skiing in the various regions, but the roles of ski clubs in those regions. I see there's a history of skiing in Arizona. They got the Western Heritage Award earlier. I'm sure they talked about the ski clubs there. Nationally, again, I'm listing a number of resources that I'm familiar with, I've used, and they talk about extensively the role of ski clubs in the skiing in those regions. And of course, my books also as well. My ski club, the Holly Ski Club, a fellow historian named Dave Galvin, I have posted a number of history papers on that, essays. One of them is Ski Clubs in Washington, that Dave Galvin gave. It's accessible through the line. And there are over 50 ski clubs he gives a summary history of. And again, this is Washington, but I'm sure there are comparable resources in your states. It's just a matter of finding. Another great resource, I guess, again, the National Ski Association sanctioned ski tournaments all over the country. The regional affiliates, in our case, the Pacific Northwest Ski Association, sanctioned ski races throughout the Northwest. And every fall, they published a list of sanctioned races coming up for the next winter. And here you can see Boise Ski Club, Yakima Winter Sports Club, Sun Valley Ski Club, Leavenworth, Penn. So every October, you can get this. I find it in Seattle Times. And if you have one of those ski clubs, it will tell you the dates of a major tournament you're holding. And then you go to the newspapers on those dates to get the newspaper coverage. So that's one of the ways you can use these digital resources to really focus on your own club's history. And don't overlook railroad resources. Certainly in Washington and throughout the country, railroads are the primary access to some of the early ski areas and ski tournaments. In Washington, Northern Pacific took people to the Cleon ski tournaments. Great Northern took people to the Leavenworth ones. And of course, they were promoting these tournaments because they were selling tickets. And the Milwaukee Railroad actually opened a ski area in 1938 in the state of Washington. And I've got, these are from my books, but these are wonderful little things you can find that really add color to the presentation. It's railroad information, but they have these great little pictures in them. Online resources, again, they're terrific ones. Sahali Ski Club, again, this is Washington. Alphabet.org. My friend and colleague Lowell Skoog last year won the Western Heritage Award for his book. Written in snow, he and I were co-founders of the Western States Ski and Snowboard Museum. He spent 20 years assembling information about outdoor recreation, winter outdoor recreation in Washington. And there's a plethora of information on his website for if you're doing research in the state of Washington, and there are likely similar websites online you can find in your own state. Now, sources of historic photographs. Again, many of the same ones that I mentioned before for your information. I've got many great photographs that I have in my books taken from newspapers. And again, digitally you can get it. Now what you need here is Adobe Acrobat and some sort of photo editing program like Photoshop. And what I do, I take a screenshot of a newspaper article with a picture in it, paste it into Word or WordPerfect, save it as a PDF, and then bring that up in Photoshop. You can crop it and enhance it. And again, wonderful photos of ski events that were covered. On the left is an indoor ski meet in 1939, hosted by the Seattle Ski Club. And that has to be Olaf Uland doing a jump on the indoor jump. It was a sanctioned ski meet for both ski jumping and slalom racing. And on the right, the famous Rude brothers in 1938 competing on Snoqualmie Pass in the Seattle Ski Club event. And they toured the country. They were the famous ski jumpers in the world. And they toured the country and competed all over, including Sun Valley, Los Angeles, Chicago, the Bay Area, and Seattle. Again, you get wonderful photographs showing what your ski clubs were doing through those newspapers. And you can get actual copies of photographs if you want. This happens to be Torber Tokla setting a new distance record at the Milwaukee Ski Bowl at one of Seattle Ski Club's sanctioned tournaments. Jumped 288 feet, a new national distance record. And you can see on the left the picture that was in the newspaper. And it happened to be an Associated Press newspaper, or photograph. So I contacted Associated Press, and they have many of their press photographs taken from 1920 on. And you have to buy them, but we bought that. I helped do an exhibit on ski jumping in the Nordic Museum, and we used that as part of it. And I've actually got that picture hanging on my office at home. Other terrific sources for historic photographs, universities, they have special collections. In the state of Washington, the University of Washington has a ton of historic photos from the ski industry, Central Washington University, and a terrific one that's, West Coast and nationally oriented is the Marriott Museum Library at the University of Utah. They have a huge collection of ski history and paraphernalia. Other sources, museums, libraries, and government sources, our Museum of History and Industry, Nordic Museum, Leavenworth Museum. Those are all places where I got photographs. Our State Historical Society and our State Archives. And these are just some of the pictures I got from those sources. On the lower left is from our Department of Transportation. Snoqualmie Pass is on I-90 now, it's a state highway. There are 10,000 cars parked on the highway to see the ski tournament hosted by the Seattle Ski Club. The middle one is from British Columbia, the Canadian National Jumping Champion, Canadian Mountaineer in 1922. The one to the right of that is the Clallam Ski Club's jump. It's supposed to be 6% steeper than any in Norway. And the top one is from the Leavenworth Museum about their ski hill and ski jump. So again, I've gotten dozens and dozens of photographs I've used from those kinds of resources. And don't forget our own Ingrid Wickens, California Ski Library. There's a marvelous collection of photographs and historical materials. I've quoted a little blurb from her website there. It's a collection of books, magazines, photographs, and ephemera related to all facets and disciplines of skiing. Ingrid is marvelous. She's a promoter of skiing history. That's a photo from her website, and not just California, but all over the country. So if you're looking for wonderful resources, contact Ingrid. Now, these are just a few things that I got from Ingrid that I've used in here. She was kind enough to allow me those. One of the many photographs of ski jumping, that's at Snoqualmie Pass in 1934. There are brochures from the tournaments. There are advertisements for the tournaments. And then again, that's the cover of my book where I use them. So again, the resources are available. They're out there. It just takes a little digging. But believe me, it's worth it if you spend the time to find those things. Now I just wanted to point out a few ski club histories that you might want to look at if you're interested in doing this. Several of these are from the list of Western Heritage winners. Jane Wyckoff and others a couple of years ago got the award for this great history they did of her ski club. Today, Tony will talk to you about the 100-page wonderful book he did for the Ruston Ski Club. And those others are ones that won awards before. And again, you can see what they did, how they got it, the kinds of information that they have in it. So again, don't reinvent the wheel. If you want to look at a couple I've done, here's some resources that I have the citations and the material. Clallam Ski Club hosted tournaments from 1924 through the 30s. It's available in 2 different places. The Central Washington University has a website for local authors, and I have an extensive history of Clallam Ski Club there with newspaper articles, pictures, and Central Washington has the archives from the Seattle Ski Club, so I got all their information there. A shorter version is available on historylink.org. It's our online encyclopedia of Washington history, and it's a summary version, again, integrating many historic photos there. My latest is Sun Valley Ski Club history. I did it this year. Of course, in 2021, my book, Skiing Sun Valley, A History from Union Pacific to the Holdings, which is the definitive history of the region, the ski area, won the Western Heritage Award then. And I did much of my information and put it in that club, or the book. And then I used much of that to prepare this history that we submitted this year. There's a short version, and I gave you the access to that, and there's a longer version. And I'm just going to close by showing you how I've integrated some things in the text, just to give you an idea. Sun Valley is easy because the checkbook of Union Pacific paid for the ski club that formed actually before Sun Valley opened. And it was a prestigious thing, and it was an integral part of the Sun Valley Ski Resort, and the Sun Valley Ski Resort introduced alpine skiing. So this is a wonderful resource. It's published every year. They not only talked about detailed descriptions of every tournament, Harriman Cup, the national championships, but the new ski runs and everything the club is doing. And again, this is just illustrative of what I've done. You can see that's I scanned the cover of the first 1936-37 ski club report, and that's the board of directors, which is very prestigious. Averill Harriman was chairman, and people like Nelson Rockefeller and other Wall Street magnates, along with some of the best ski racers, were on the board of directors. Again, these are just examples of what I've done. I scanned a lot of the wonderful pictures that were on the cover, and you can just see some of them. On the left is Dick Durrance, who won 3 Harriman Cup races and was the dominant U.S. racer in the 30s. Next is Alf Engen, who actually worked at Sun Valley until 1948. He's best known for his work in Elta. But he competed for the Sun Valley Ski Club for most of his amateur career when he won over 500 trophies. And again, you can just see the quality of the pictures they did. The lower one on the right is Tony Seiler, who won the Harriman Cup in 1957. He just won 3 gold medals in the Olympics, and he set a new downhill record. And I included the actual text of the article. Again, this is just illustrative. Here are more things. That's Dick Durrance, a picture from the Seattle Times, where he won his first Harriman Cup in 1937. I have a picture of Durrance getting the trophy from Mrs. Averill Harriman. Women didn't have first names in those days. And the finishing order, and on the right, the competitors from some of those. Again, you can talk about it in text, but seeing the actual list of competitors is, I think, a lot of fun, and people seem to enjoy that. Again, just more things. That's a picture of Dick Durrance showing his winning downhill form in 1937. He said he was known for skiing fast straight down the hill in a wedge. And he said his philosophy was, I hates to turn. He just point him downhill and go. And of course, you can imagine the ski technology in those days. On the right is just from the ski club report of 1 year, other things they covered: Sun Valley Ski School, backcountry skiing around Pioneer Cabin, summer ice skating, and just to give the people an idea of the myriad of activities that the resort and the ski club did. Last one are just some pictures from 1948. Olympic team, the 40 Olympic team was selected at Sun Valley. Alf Engen, who was a ski instructor there, was one of the co-coaches with Walter Prager, who was the Dartmouth coach. And you can see the ski club there. The picture on the upper right, Gretchen Fraser was the first American to earn Olympic ski medals. She won a gold and a silver in the 1948 San Moritz Olympics. She's from Tacoma, Washington. She learned to ski on Mount Rainier, and she lived to train in Sun Valley. So again, those are just illustrative of what I've done to integrate not only text, but pictures and other materials. So that's my presentation. Let's bring Tony up here. I have to unplug and this is my book. It's got 200 historic pictures in it. I love historic pictures. I've published 4 books, and all have at least 180 historic pictures in them. And I think that brings so much to a publication. People, okay,
So let me interject something here. John didn't tell you this, but how many people recognize this book?
Yeah.
This is the Far West 90-year history book that came out a couple months ago. So it's a great book, another history book. But see that picture on the cover?
Yeah.
That's in John's book.
this is.
Hold it again. I can see it. Not in front of your face, not in front of your face.
You should get both of us in this.
Yeah. Okay.
Go.
Oh, yeah, that's me in 1936.
The lighting's better, go back a little bit further.
Okay.
There we go.
This was actually published a few years ago, 90th anniversary. I have to say that Far West Ski Club doesn't have a big presence in the state of Washington. I frankly never heard about it until John Watson called me 3 years ago and said, we're doing our 90th anniversary, would you write some essays for us? I said, who is this again? And so I wrote an essay about the history of skiing in Sun Valley and the history of skiing in Washington. And again, they happen to use one of my pictures. That happens to be Berger Ruud jumping in Washington on the Pass in 1938. This is available, at least digitally. There's wonderful history in here. Ingrid Wicken has history of skiing in California. There's a 2-page history of skiing in Bogus Basin. And John wrote the history of the Far West Ski Club, which is needing a lot of information I didn't know. So again, you can get this digitally, and it's a wonderful resource.
When I first talked to John about this, he tried to tell me that was a picture of him. And I said, John, you really want people to know you're that old?
Anytime I'm mistaken for Berger Ruud, I'll take that.
Give us a couple minutes.
And you don't
Switch
need this.
laptops.
You don't need this.
Okay.
Plugged in. So I would add, if any of you want to write Tony, you're standing on the board, your own history, I'd be happy to consult with you. My information, contact information is in the brochure for this year, and my email's there. Contact me, and I'd be happy to brainstorm stuff and give you some suggestions.
Well, they're changing laptops. I just wanted to note that we did a limited printed run of our 90th anniversary, and they're being still sold. I think Randy Lou still has some. So if any of you might be interested, I think they were charging a nominal fee to help us cover the cost, but
Are they here?
let me check with Randy Lou, and we'll find out for you.
It's a
Yeah.
marvelous resource, and I would urge all of you to get a copy if you can. There are digital copies available. Just, you can Google the title and get a digital copy. So if you can't get a hard one, at least you can get a digital. And as I say, there's 8 or 10 articles on the history of skiing all over the West, and a great one by John of the history of the Far West Ski Association.
Yeah, just to add, COVID kind of messed it up. We were supposed to have a big celebration in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
For the founding of the California Ski Association, which was, and COVID came in and that went haywire, so we never did it.
Yeah.
It's too bad.
Oh,
It would
yeah.
be nice for history.
It would have been a wonderful thing to do, and but we'll celebrate next year and this year. By the way, there's certificates of attendance here if you're interested in one, and you can come and pick them up at the end of the presentation. I can give you extra. My website has the video. I can, this is on my website. Yes,
How old does the club have to be considered a historical?
50 years.
50 years.
yeah. And of course, we have 50 or 80 Washington ski clubs that are much older than that. Some exist still, some don't. But again, I've reached out to at least 3 of our historic ones, urging them to, they haven't done their history, and I want them to do their history. But at a minimum, they can be designated as acknowledged historic ski clubs by our organization.
Yeah, sometimes it's a little difficult to show when the club was formed. We went through boxes, Vanessa Ski Club in California. We went through boxes and boxes of old papers, and I found the first minutes of the first meeting in 1932.
Yeah.
I mean, we had no idea that we were that old.
Yeah.
So I had a whole book of minutes, so we went all the way to 1938.
Yeah, that's the treasure trove of stuff that are in those boxes that someone has.
And sometimes ours were in a container somewhere we hadn't used in years.
Yeah.
And we decided to get rid of the containers, so we found all those boxes. There were some ski magazines that had articles about the Modesto Ski Club.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing, maybe for a later date, but the Modesto Ski Club was very involved in teaching skiing.
Yeah.
They had different licenses for skiing.
Yeah.
I think 1, 2, and 3, I think it was called.
Oh, yeah.
And one thing more, like you showed some like competition, the Modesto Ski Club was fined, I think, $20 for participating in a non-sanctioned ski race after the California Ski Association. At that time, it started becoming a little
Again, that's
more.
part of the history. Sahali Ski Club started giving lessons in 1932 to its members because there were no ski lessons.
Right.
So some guys that had been skiing for 3 years got up there and taught people who were just putting skis on. That's the way it was done in those days. There were no ski lessons, and equipment was passed from one person to another because you couldn't get ski equipment. But that's the wonderful history of our club. So that's why it's my mission to bring those memories forward and preserve them, make them accessible.
Thank you, John. Thanks for that great recognition of ski club history. I was going to try it up with my. All right, is that better? Okay. Anyways, when I proposed this idea of having this presentation about ski club history, John wasn't part of the presentation, but then when we got to know each other, he had a wealth of information and background on not only researching ski club history, but then put it into a book. And he was very enthusiastic and, like me, was very interested in all clubs trying to develop some kind of ski history. It doesn't have to be an extensive book, but every club has all these old pictures and stories and newspaper articles and clothing, and it goes on. And it basically just has to be assembled, and then somebody has to take the time to put it into a book. So John was a perfect person to talk about that before my presentation. So my goal is to show you how simple it can be to put together a history book. And not only the effort by members of your club, but the actual technical aspect. And as I put together the book, I also had in mind of making a presentation someday about putting together a book. And to make it so easy that technically all you would have to really have is just the ability to create a document. So if you can create a document using whatever the word processor is that you use, you have enough, you have enough technical knowledge and skill to actually produce the book. And so there's several reasons for that, and that's what I will explain in my presentation. So I'll go ahead and get started with the first slide. Bear with me. So I have a sciatic issue and I have to take a medication to be able to get through this. So I'm probably going to read a lot of my notes just to make sure I don't forget something. So anyways, okay, here's the first slide. And I'm going to be talking about putting together a digital history book although I will briefly discuss a printed book as we get towards the end. And these pictures of pages that I will use in the presentation comes from, this is the book that I wrote. It's the 50-year history of Rusty Vikings, and it's 100 pages.
What's on your face?
Oh, okay.
You gotta be seen.
I'd rather do
Yeah,
that.
there you go.
Anyway, so, oh, thank you. Yeah, it's good. I've gotten a lot of comments on it. So it took me a fair time to do the to write the book, but it wasn't technically difficult to write the book, to develop it. I believe every club could preserve their history, so I volunteered to do a presentation to share with that how easy it can be. So the opening slide is just sort of a summary of what I'm going to be talking about. And it lists 4 steps, and those 4 steps mirror the handout that I passed everybody. So the handout is more of a step-by-step process that I went through, where the slides are going to sort of give you a visual representation of that. What's in the handout. So there's 4 steps up there. So as we go through this, sort of visualize or have a concept that what we're really doing, or the person or persons that might be writing this book, it's actually like 4 separate little projects. 4 separate little projects. As you do each one, then you build on that, and by the end of it, you're not going to have 4 projects you put together that will just dovetail together, and now you have your book. Now, taken as a whole, and if you were to go through this book, you would look at it and you'd probably be intimidated by everything that's in here. But as I'm going to explain, you can really break it down. It's not really that difficult. It is time consuming. But if you have 3 or 4 dedicated people to work on it, it can be done and fairly easily. So like I said, 4 separate projects. The first 3 basically don't involve any technical skill, maybe number 3. The 4th one is the only one that requires some technical skill. And that's what I'll explain, and I'll explain it slowly in detail. So, okay. So what we have here, on the left side, that's actually my dining room table, after I cleaned it before I put all that stuff on it. So that is actually several months of me collecting historical stuff from the members of my club, past members, current members, not people aren't members anymore. I mean, anywhere I can find it, I collect it. And I took that forward just to show you that's basically what you're going to get after you've worked hard to collect stuff. You've got a stack of stuff on your table. And just look at the photo on the left, all the stuff on the table, and that stack became this. So going through the process, you just condense it all down, and eventually you'll have a book. Okay, on the right is what I did after I went through all the historical stuff, and I just broke it down into categories, subjects, which would eventually become chapters. I have 2 boxes there. There's about 30 to 40 hanging folders. So as I subdivided the stack of historical stuff, I subdivided into about 30 or more categories or chapters, or what would be chapters. So the first step took several months to accumulate. The second step, it took me about a weekend to do, but if you get 4 people together that are working on it, they probably do it in a few hours. However, let me warn you, what starts to happen when you have all these people going through old pictures, there's a lot of distractions. Oh my God, I can't believe that's me 20 years ago. Or, that's John Preston? That's John Preston? And then they see photos about people they've heard about but never met, and then they see photos of friends, which I can't wait to show their friends. So if you focused, you could probably get a group who could get it done in an evening over a few glasses of wine. But if you're like my club, those kind of events that should take an evening, we probably have to meet 2 or 3 times to get it done. Okay, so here is the first chapter. Now, when you're going to write this book, I strongly recommend you start with your core chapters. So I found doing a ski club book, probably the most important chapter is how the club began. And that's a good chapter just by its name to be the first one. The other 2 core chapters should be your recreational skiing, story, and then of course, if you have a race team, your ski racing. So you start with those 3, and once you've built those 3, everything else will just come together easily. So once you do the first chapter, the way I did it is I just focused on the first chapter, and that's how I got my confidence and experience to go to the next 2. And once I had completed the first 3 core chapters, it all fell together very quickly. So you'll see on the right side, you'll see all that text. So the picture on the left is where I took the folder I had called Club Beginnings. I had all kinds of pictures and stories and articles and you name it. And I laid that all out, and I wrote that 1-page story on the right from the stuff I had seen on my table from the left. Now, one of the things I found is that the easiest way to build the written part of a book, history book, is to utilize what's already been written by somebody in a form of newsletter. Because they researched it, they were there, it's going to be accurate most likely, and then I don't have to do a lot of thinking, I'm just copying and pasting the story for someone else. So if you have your club's newsletters, you definitely want to utilize that. Okay, on to the little bit more technical aspect. So what I did is I use Microsoft Word. There's a lot of other word processors that are just sort of knockoffs of Microsoft Word. And Microsoft Word by itself probably have over 1,000 different options you can use to write a document. You name it, they've incorporated into the program. However, because I wanted it to be as simple as possible, and I'm an experienced Word user of Microsoft Word, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to take what they had and what could be the bare bones, simplest options that they offer to make a document. What would be the absolutely easiest way for anybody that could just basically type a document to produce a book? And so a template, first of all, a template, or in this case 4 different templates. The template is just the product of somebody that has more experience in advance, breaking it down into something where you don't have to really do any of use the bells and whistles, you just plug stuff in. So the concept of plug and play. So as we go through this, just keep that image on the left in mind, because that's sort of that's what's on the page you're working on, that's what's underlined. You don't see those dots and all that. But that's basically how the page is laid out. You just got parts of a page. You got the top, which is a heading, and in this case you have 2 columns. That's it. To produce that and get to that point, it's all been done for you. You just have the opportunity to use it. So it's sort of like, as I was doing this, I was thinking about, so what analogy is there? And I thought of, you know what this is like? Has anybody ever done a paint by numbers? This is a version of paint by numbers, only it's Microsoft Word. So the actual template, and if you're interested in the templates and actually my notes from the slideshow and these slides, you can always email me, and I'll just send it to you. I'll respond and send it back to you, so you can have your own copy. But on the right, that is what template A looks like. And it's sort of got some screwy stuff in it, but that's what I call the demo images and the demo text, just to show you what the layout looks like. So what we will do is we will just very simply work our way through the different areas. We'll delete the demo part of it, and then you'll insert, or I'll insert as I show you, your own image or your own text. And that's it. As far as building, you know, the technical part of the page. Okay, so here we pulled up template A. First thing to do with the template though is you need to rename it, because we're not going to call the chapter, which is Club Beginnings, we're not going to call it template A, of course. We're going to rename it to Club Beginning. So once you rename template A to Club Beginning, you can see in the top left corner there, in the red it says heading area empty. Well, I had just deleted out what was in that area of template A. And then we go over to the right side. You can see at the top there's two images and a caption underneath. So out of my collection of Wesley Binding's history, those were the two pictures I wanted to use. The first picture was Wesley Binding's first clubhouse where they met in 1972. And then the other picture that I had chosen for this chapter was a picture of Rusty Binding's after they left the clubhouse, they went to a little restaurant. And that's a picture of the first restaurant where they would use the room on a regular basis. Neither of which are there any longer, by the way. It's amazing what you find out when you start digging into the history of these things. So that clubhouse was where somebody lived, an apartment building back in 1972. It's long gone. And the restaurant they went to used to be a swimming pool that they had built over and turned it into a restaurant. Okay, so we deleted the items in the heading, and next we're going to change the title. That'll be the title of the chapter. So you can see on the left where it says deletion here, and I removed the demo title that was there. Just highlight it, hit delete, it's gone. And then I decided I was going to call this The Beginnings of Rusty Binding in 1971. So I typed it in. I just typed it in, and then I chose my particular font. So Microsoft Word, other word processors, you probably have 100 different fonts you can choose from, you know, that you like for titling your chapters.
And which do you use? Which font?
Oh, it's a real odd one. I'd have to look at it. It's Bookman style something. And the small text is 14 point, and the title is 24 point, almost twice as big. Okay, so we've replaced the images and caption in the heading, and we replaced the title of the chapter at the beginning of one of the two columns. So now we're going to input the text or the story that we wrote about the club beginnings. So you can see on the right side, all that empty space, I just went in, highlighted the text and the image in the column. In fact, I highlight everything in the columns except the title, hit delete, and now I have a page that's basically empty, waiting for something to be inserted. Okay, so let's go back to when I was talking about you made a bunch of folders out of different topics of the historical stuff you accumulated about your club. So on the left, you can see that text. That's that story I had written. And you can see how I highlighted everything in the story part except the title. And then I went over, and where there was all that empty space, I put the cursor in the right place, and I said, paste it in, and I pasted in the story. So what you see on the left, once it's pasted into the columns, that's what it looks like on the right side. So far we've done 3 steps. We've inserted images and a caption in the heading. We changed the title. Now we pasted in the story that we had previously written. So it's 3 steps to this point. And here we are at the last step. So if you have images that you're going to put into the column, well, that would be the last thing you do. You find where in the column of writing or text, and you just put the image in. If you don't have any images, then you're done with that chapter, and you can save it. I added another image because I wanted to show a picture of how young and good-looking the early members of Rusty Bindings were, and I had a picture of four of the people that started the club, and I pasted it in. So now I'm done with that chapter. It was only a one-page chapter. I had a lot of one-page chapters because I wanted my book to be under 100 pages because I was planning to print it. So that was important. I could have easily made this book 200 pages by pictures and flyers and articles and you name it. But I had a goal of keeping it at 100 pages. So anyways, most of the chapters in the book are one page, but some of them are 5 and 6. Yes?
Do you have to size the pictures to fit in the column, or does that happen automatically?
No, you do have to do that, but again, Microsoft Word will do all that for you.
Oh, yeah.
Now, at this point, so far, anybody with basic word processing skills could do everything I've said here, but maybe somebody a little more advanced, maybe intermediate, will have to work with the pictures. But if you have the picture in the form of a JPEG or one of the others, you basically, what I do is, because a lot of pictures are really large, so I have a blank Microsoft Word page, and then I copy that into the page, so it doesn't interfere with anything else I'm working on. And then once you've got that, you select the picture, you get the little anchors around the corners, and Word will allow you to drag those corners down to the size you want. It will also allow you to crop it. So it's all right there, and once you've done one or two, you can do any picture. What I might point out is that most of the pictures that you will copy that's already a JPEG image or whatever, or a scanned image, which will turn into a JPEG before you're done with it. You just paste them into an empty page, and then you use that as your workboard, and you drag it to be smaller, or you crop it, or whatever. And like I said, it's a very simple process. Once you've done it, you become an expert. So anyways, that was step 4, so now that I've got that image in my chapter, I'm done with it, and I just want to save it. And again, naming, renaming, and saving a Word document is a basic skill that most everybody has to do that. So any questions on that part? So to me, of the original 4 steps that I had listed up there, the last one would be the one that probably most people would find challenging. But you can see even that's not that challenging once you've done it once or twice. So you all can be writers of books once you complete your club history book. Yes,
One thing that you said that is key is dragging it by the corners versus dragging it by the side or the
right,
top.
yeah, you gotta drag the corners to shrink it down or even to expand it too. But it also has a crop feature, which is just funny, sort of square things. And again, once you learn to do that a couple times, you can take any picture you want and go, oh, I want to cut that out, or I want to make it smaller. And again, as I was doing this book, I was also thinking about, so what is the bare bones, simplest amount of tools that you would need to do this? And I think I got it down to just a handful of things you have to learn to do the book. So we have the contents of the book, and obviously there's a lot of things going on in the book, like you might have lists of all your ski successes, or all your presidents, or past boards, or on. And you would use other templates for that. So let me go to the next page here. Okay, so here are the 4 templates. So the one in the upper left corner, template A, that was, it had a heading and 2 columns. That's it. That's the whole template. A heading and 2 columns. Okay, now you go to the next one. And the next one is a template that's just 2 columns. There's no heading. So if you want one of your chapters or pages that have 2 columns, you just use template B. Just 2 columns, no heading. Okay, let's go on to the third one, which is in the lower left corner. I called that template C. And that just has a heading, but no columns. You could say 1 column if you wanted to, but basically it's a template that just has a heading area, and then the rest of it is just a basic document page. And then, of course, the last template is just a Word page for any kind of document. So it's really not even a template. It's just you pull up the page, you just make sure that your margins are consistent with your other pages, and you use that. So those are the only 4 templates that I used to make this. Even the cover was actually template C. I just pulled up a Word document page and I made this cover, which I'll talk about next briefly. Any questions on that? Nobody's confused. Well, that's to me, that's good, because the whole idea was to show that it's, yes?
Can you address formatting the pictures so that it doesn't distort your text when you're moving it over?
Well, see, that's the reason for, that's controlled by the column. So things that would normally control that is already in the column template. Now, Word has all kinds of things you can do with a photograph. And the reason I chose columns for the book versus, let's say, a page that has no columns, it's just because if you're going to put smaller pictures in a page without columns, then you have all these extra formatting things going on to make it work, and it becomes complicated, because when you start changing the text or wanting to move it, there's a lot of things that go on, and you really have to know what you're doing. So obviously that doesn't fit into my goal of making it simple. So the column template, the column handles all that. So you paste whatever you paste into the column, the size stays the same. It doesn't interfere with what controls the text. So if you put a little teeny picture in the column, it stays small. If you put a big one in, it won't let you do it if it's bigger than the size of the column. And if it does, you just reduce it down so it fits. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, so let's just, one more segment to this, and I want to talk about the covers. So I have 5 sample covers. So the covers is anything you want it to be. I looked at a lot of different, well, actually one of the last things I did was the cover, because for some reason, when you first start, you might have an idea of what you want the cover to look like. But once you've gone through the history, you've seen all these different things and pictures and whatever, you're going to change. Your whole perspective's going to change. Because you put in all this work and you're really proud of it. You say, well, I want a cover that's unique to my club, that represents all this stuff I've learned and it's our history. So I chose this, and I looked at a lot of different other, I went online and looked at 50-year history books. So I looked and I came up with what I thought were 5 pretty good ones, and I played with them. But the one I chose, not the one I chose, but the one I got the idea for this was actually on my bookcase. It was Sports Illustrated 50-Year History. Phenomenal book. But theirs is very professional, needless to say, and they have 50 years of their magazine covers, which is just impressive in itself, just to think about that. So I couldn't do that, but what I thought I'd do is, okay, well, I have almost 40 years, with a lot of months missing, but almost 40 years of Rusty Bindings newsletters. And most of them are bland, but some of them are pretty good. They go, okay, well, I can't do what Sports Illustrated did, but I sort of like that concept. So if you look at this book, the background are about 24 of Rusty Bindings' more interesting covers over 50 years. So that's where I got the idea. It's right there on my shelf all the time. But you can do whatever you want. I'll show you. So the one I like besides mine, of course, is the one I showed you.
Yeah. Right.
Because Far West decided to use one of John's pictures. And tell me it doesn't grab your attention. The guy's skiing up in the air like that. You can tell it's older, has some history to it. And the fact he's so high in the air, and all those people there just staring at this guy flying.
The expressions on the crowd really tell the
Yeah,
story.
right. If you look closer, especially in the crowd. So anyways, that's a great cover. So I thought they had very good taste with that. But let me show you some older ones that will show you sort of the range of from good to very, let's put it this way, from very interesting to not so interesting.
Here we go.
Now this one I thought was interesting. It's called Soul on Snow, and it's from 2023, so it's pretty new. But it's an interesting cover. And so I would want to look at that, because the cover gets your attention. Now here's one, it's 100-year history. And the fact that it says a century of skiing, well, that would be interesting to look at. But I sort of like all the skiers at the top, coming down, whatever they're doing together. Here's another one. So this is a 60-year history book, but you could, I mean, I think you'll agree it's about as simple and plain as you can get. But you could do it. Take you maybe 5 minutes to put that cover together. So it can be ranging from something more elaborate to something very, very basic. So.
Tony, are you going to tell us how you superimpose the title over the background pictures that you have?
Okay, so that, yeah. Well, that wasn't, let me go back to it. Yeah, excuse me, so that is the one area, the cover, which could be anything, is I did use something a little bit more advanced to do that. I didn't do that in Word. I used something that's a knockoff of Photoshop, and it's just layers. So when you're using something like, it's a very simple procedure once you understand layers. So you have one page, but the software allows you to make different layers. And you just put what you want on the layers, and then you just sort of shuffle the layers to get what you want. So obviously the first thing I did was I had all those little newsletters. So that's the first layer. And then I added some of the other text. And, okay, so I remember, so the newsletters was the first layer, the giant 50 was the second layer, and then so there's 3 layers, and then actually the rusty bindings part was the third layer, and then the fourth layer was the rest of the text. And I could move those around. If I wanted to reposition them, I just go to that layer and
What was that,
position
what
the
was
text.
that program called again?
Um,
Publisher? No.
no, it's any of the knockoffs from Photoshop. Yeah. But you can get much less expensive versions of Photoshop that are much simpler. And that's what I would recommend.
But actually, in Word itself, when you insert a picture, you can, there's an option where you tell whether you want that picture to be, whether you want text on top of it, to be wrapping around the
Right,
picture.
yes, it's called wrapping.
Or you can select that the text be on top of the picture, or the picture be on top of text, either way. So in this case, I guess the background could be just a picture, and then all the text could be, you select that you don't want the text to be wrapping around, instead you want it on top of the picture. And then you just type in the text, and there it is.
Well, Microsoft Word, even though it's just a word processor, it's much more. I mean, they even talk about it. It's both a word processor and a publishing software because it has so many powerful tools. But that gets a little complicated when you start installing the wrapping feature. And that's why I didn't do that, because I wanted to keep this so bare bones basic, and so easy, and have people avoid getting into some of the tools that you really need some expertise to work with it, because it takes so little. So you can start out with something simple, and then you want to make it a little fancier. One little wrong step and you skewed all your work, and it takes twice as much knowledge to undo your damage than to do it to start. And so I've been through that, and so that's why I really try to keep this. I mean, what is the minimum that you can do and not, make a mess of things? Because you make a mess of things, the result is you get discouraged, and you get discouraged, yeah, and then you don't finish it. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to try and do something different. Yeah. So again, almost everybody at some point in time is going to document. Almost everybody has a word processor if they have a computer. Anybody can write, because when you write this book, so I'm a decent writer because I've had to do that throughout my career, but I'm not a writer. I'm not John London, okay? And but I did learn to just get my thoughts down. It takes a while to train yourself to do this. Not worry about the grammar, not worry about the punctuation. That's not important. You need to get your thoughts and stories down. And anybody can do that. And it gets a lot easier when you've got photos sitting in front of you, and you got newspaper and newsletter articles about something, and you're trying to do one page and you got all this stuff in front of you, you fill that one page up pretty quick. If you sat down and just wanted to, just off the top of your head, write something, you'd probably sit there and maybe do a sentence and then go, I don't like that sentence, and you rewrite the sentence, and you try to do another sentence because you're just working from a blank slate. But the beauty of having all this interesting stuff that you're interested in sitting in front of you, you don't have much trouble writing. You feel it, you can write it by hand. I like to write by hand because that's sort of how I grew up writing. I write by hand. I can easily fill up a page by hand. Then I basically got my thoughts and all done with by hand, and then I type that out. And then I go back 2 or 3 times and just add more. And if you have anybody in the club that has basic making a document skills or writing skills, anybody in the club can contribute. And that's the way I approach it. I didn't care. I wanted everybody, especially the board, had to twist their arms, get them going. But I wanted them to all contribute something. Yeah. And once it becomes, I think you know from your own clubs, once something new gets started and several people get involved and start talking about it, and it gets their interest, it sort of takes on a life of its own. And I was amazed at some of the stuff that came out of the woodwork for my book. So my favorite, I have a lot of favorite stories, but as far as getting information for this book, so I knew that once I started, that I wanted to try and reconstruct every board member from each year for the 50 years. I never thought I would get them all. I thought, well, if I could get really close, because I already had the newsletters that had from 84 onward. So I had a good start. I had 1984 through 21 of all the board members each year, even the ones that were only there part-time. One year, Rusty Bunings had 3 presidents. The first president kept showing up at the board meetings too tipsy, so they had to replace him, and so the vice president automatically became the new president. Well, the vice president decided to get married, and the club couldn't have married people in it back then. So then they had to appoint another board member to be president. So that little story's in the book. And so that's the year we had to have 3 presidents. So to finish this story, so I didn't have anything prior to 84, so I put it out to all the people that were interested in my book and doing little contributions from the past. And I couldn't believe it. Within a week, somebody had been helping me. She was a real, shaker and mover in the 80s. She had a typed list of all the board members from the first time they met in 1971. It just came out of nowhere. So I'm so proud, and I've had comments about that. They're commenting on, how did you get every board member for 50 years? But to me, it was meant to be. I mean, there's sort of a force that goes on that when enough people are doing something, it creates its own energy. Something we don't fully understand why all that happens, but it does create its own energy. Yes?
Question about the 3 presidents. Did you actually write the story about the first president in the book?
Yes.
And did you get comments on that?
Oh. No. Well, so, because I was worried about that, so I went back to some of the people that were very active in the club at that time, and I told them the story, and they confirmed that it was true, and they told other stories that went along with it. I won't get into that. But they're laughing. I talked to 3 people, and they all just start laughing, and I go, well, was it well known? He said, oh yeah, everybody knew it. Everybody knew him. He didn't care, So she said, it's not going to matter at this many years later. He's not going to care. So.
Yeah, I imagine you have to be careful with some of the stories.
Well, yeah.
Because we've had presidents being removed.
Well, okay. So, to your point, there's a chapter in here called The Rusty Mouth. In the 80s, Rusty Bunings, their newsletter, had a gossip column. And it was written by a person that nobody knew who it was. And he would get stuff, and I mean, I put in some stuff, but I just changed the names. But it's some pretty raunchy stuff. Rusty Bunings was over the top in the 80s.
Everybody was.
Well, that's right, everybody was, because I lived in Southern California, and I was involved in a big track club, because that's what I did when I was younger. And I remember I go, you know what? Our track club was the running version of Rusty Bunings. Because we would have our competitions, and like Rusty Bunings, we usually won everything, so we'd go to these parties, and we would get drunk as could be. We just automatically did that. Rusty Bunings had the reputation of being, they were a drinking club with a ski problem. So, one of their many reputations. So yeah, but anyways, the Rusty Mouth had all these, and they actually disbanded the Rusty Mouth after 4 years because of complaints.
5-minute warning.
What's that?
5-minute warning.
Oh, is that long?
Still ready.
Wow, okay. Any other technical questions?
Well, actually, it's not technical, but around.
15 years.
How do you confirm releases of photographs? Because I ended up on a newsletter one time, and I said, hey, somebody should have checked.
Well, Okay, this is the way, if I really, I mean, I would never put anything in that was unflattering. Somehow I had to thought it. I had to believe it was really relevant or it was flattering or whatever. Because most people, I can't check with all these people, they're long gone. The way I looked at it is because, like the Rusty Mouse stories and some of their pictures, they were in the newsletter. So that was my excuse. It was in the newsletter. It's like almost public information.
Right.
I had a couple, what I call they were with the club for a long time, they were big contributors, but I refer to them as old curmudgeons. And they had to complain about some information I had. But I went to lengths to confirm and document everything in my book, and that's all I would say. You give me something in writing or something that shows me that what I said was incorrect, that's fine. Otherwise, it stays. But yeah, of course you're going to run into that. But we all know that. And we're grown-ups. We know what it's like to deal with people.
Most of us.
And don't let those people discourage you. Yes.
But that's like here, we actually, when we sign up for the registration here, we're saying that we understand there's pictures taken, and we have to decline purposely if we don't want pictures.
Yeah, you gotta do this.
Jim, does ski clubs have like membership applications or something like that that you have to sign?
Well, every club has some kind of waiver, I'm sure. But I've never seen where it says you're releasing your handsome face to all of our future pictures.
So you could certainly write that in there.
But you know what, it hasn't been a problem other than what you would typically find in anywhere, workplace, church, neighborhood,
Well, I think in our ski clubs, it's not a big deal, but for instance, we volunteer with organizations, and then we have to sign a waiver that our image can be used for commercials, so it kind of depends what we do. But in our ski club, we don't.
So my comment has often been, if somebody's looking at something complaining, I go, that's great, I know that you're reading it. John?
Tony, the one thing that you didn't discuss was scanning photos to make digital copies. That's a whole new area.
Yep.
But you can do it yourself, or places like Costco will do it commercially. And it's a lot easier. However, if you're scanning them, do a TIFF copy instead of a JPEG. If you're doing any work on Photoshop or the others, if you open a JPEG and do anything, it deteriorates the quality.
Yeah.
So get a JPEG, get a TIFF. It's a lot more higher resolution, sometimes too high for a product, but you can do whatever modification you want and then convert that to a JPEG and use it. But that's just one of the
Well,
things.
yeah, and that is one technique, and that's probably the best technique, but for me, again, to keep it super simple, is what I did is, so when I use your scanner, any scanner, okay, that you have, you can set the resolution. So if you set it really high, it takes a little bit longer to scan, but you get a much better picture. And for a book like this, and the pictures are smaller, that's how I worked around that.
Yeah. Although again, a TIFF, I've published 4 books. You got to do it in TIFF format because it's so much higher resolution and better. And if you do any, it doesn't deteriorate if you do any modification.
JPEG is a lossy compression algorithm, so it does lose its data quality, and it combines pixels, so you actually do lose quality even on large images.
Yeah, I was just trying to keep it simple as possible.
Very good. Very good.
Tony, just a comment, I've been in that club from the 70s to the 80s, and then all the stuff we went through. I mean, we went to the reunion and whatnot.
Oh,
and,
great.
Great, and thank you for all the effort you put together.
You're welcome.
Put something like that on. I've read other books, I used to be a judge before, was looking at some of the stuff they put out for stuff.
Yeah.
You did a great job, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, thank you.